Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nursing the Future's Masterclass series. I'm Judy Dupcher, and I'm the Director of Nursing the Future. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this particular session on internationally educated nurses, what the challenges are, what the benefits are to having internationally educated nurses ethically brought to Canada to supplement our workforce. And we have a portfolio of guest speakers today that I think you'll very much enjoy, giving us a comprehensive perspective on this issue. The first is Joan Atlin, and Joan is the Senior Director of Policy and Research at World Education Services, or WES. We have Dr. Edward Cruz, who's an Associate Professor and Associate Dean of undergraduate programs at the Faculty of Nursing, University of Windsor. Third, Dr. Ruth Lee is the Executive Director of the Care Center for Internationally Educated Nurses. Leah Watts is the Project Coordinator for the Internationally Educated Nurse Preceptorship Program through the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing. And finally, Cynthia Johansen, the Registrar and CEO of the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives, or BCCNM. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see everybody.
Great to see everybody. Yes.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hello, everyone.
And I think we're starting with Joan. So Joan, I'll just move the slides ahead and you let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to briefly introduce you to the services of World Education Services, or WES. WES is a nonprofit social enterprise, and our mission is to support the educational, economic, and social inclusion of immigrants, refugees, and international students. And some of you may know us as an academic equivalency assessment body. We're one of 5 academic credential assessment services accredited by Immigration Canada to do assessments of degrees for immigration purposes. And we do several 100,000 of those every year. We also work with many regulatory colleges to provide academic equivalency assessments for licensure purposes. But more broadly, our work is about enabling individuals and driving systems change to ensure that people can use their skills and experience when they come to Canada. So we work with partners to shape policy advocacy, collaborate on the design of programs, and provide philanthropic funding. And so the issue of the underutilization of the skills and experience of healthcare professionals who immigrate to Canada is one that we've been deeply engaged in. So I just want to set the stage for today's conversation by giving some context about why it's so important to talk about IENs when we talk about the future of nursing in Canada. And I'm going to talk about the big picture, the numbers and the complex ecosystem that IENs have to navigate to move back into practice in Canada. So let's just start by looking at some numbers. And these are numbers from StatsCan and CIHI. According to a recent StatsCan study, over 85,000 immigrants to Canada have post-secondary nursing education. And according to CIHI, in 2022, internationally educated nurses, or IENs, make up 10% of registered nurses in Canada, 5% of nurse practitioners, 7% of LPNs. And this last stat at the bottom is really interesting because it really speaks to the growth of the IEN population and importance in the workforce. In 2022, IEN RNs made up 64% of the net increase in RN supply in the country, compared to only 19% the year before. So clearly IENs are playing a huge role in the nursing workforce in Canada. At the same time, a very significant portion of the IENs who settle in Canada are not working as nurses. So again, from StatsCan, 47% of individuals with a health education from abroad are either unemployed or underemployed. And underemployed means working in a job that does not require a university education, but only a high school education. 37% of those with a bachelor's degree or higher in a professional nursing program earned abroad are working in their field, only 37%. And 25% of recent immigrants who are working as nurses' aides, PSWs, patient service associates, hold a bachelor's degree at least. And of those, 69% have a nursing degree. So those stats really give us a sense of how underutilized the IEN population and their skills are in Canada. In 2023, just still speaking to that underutilization stat for a moment, West did a study last year in collaboration with other organizations like Care for Nurses, looking at INs not working as nurses in Ontario specifically. We had over 750 valid responses, and we found that 50% of the people who responded to our survey who were not currently working as nurses haven't even begun the registration process. They haven't even applied yet to the CNO. And the most commonly cited challenge for them was actually, in fact, finances. So there are all kinds of barriers that are preventing INs from even beginning the application process. And you can see from this slide how complex the ecosystem is that INs and other health professionals face when they come to Canada. INs have to navigate and interact with a complex web of organizations in order to even access the information and supports that they need, and then make their way through the process to be assessed, to fill gaps if necessary, to meet registration requirements for language, for education, recency of practice, exams, and then and only then to deal with the transition into the Canadian workplace. And all of these stakeholders have a role to play in that journey. They have overlapping roles, different mandates, and only by all of them working together can we make the journey a more seamless one for INs. So the issue of how to remove barriers and facilitate the integration of internationally educated health professionals in Canada is definitely not a new one. But the pandemic and our desperate personnel shortages have really catalyzed change and motivated stakeholders to work together to find new and more effective solutions. So this slide really shows some of the kinds of changes that have happened. There's been a real wave of major changes and new initiatives to break down some of the barriers over the last couple of years across the country, and you'll hear more of that from some of the other speakers. Many provinces have, just back on that previous slide for a moment, many provinces have established financial supports to help INs deal with significant costs for exams, bridging program tuition, and other costs. There have been new navigation and information supports established, programs like the Supervised Practice Experience Program in Ontario to help IENs meet requirements for safe practice, recent practice, and improve their language skills and orient to the Canadian workplace. That was piloted by Care for Nurses, who you'll hear from momentarily. And regulatory bodies across the country have been modernizing their processes to take into account the unique situation of internationally trained applicants. You'll hear more about that as well. So much is changing, but there's still much work to do. I'm gonna just, if we can move on to the next slide. These are the words of some INs who responded to our survey, and I think you'll hear more directly from the IN voice in Edward's presentation. But if we move on to the next slide, I think we're missing that one. Much is changing, but there is still much work to be done to ensure that the journey of INs from immigration to professional registration and into a successful and sustainable career is approached in an integrated way by the decision makers who impact that journey. First, we need to recognize as a country that the healthcare sector, as a healthcare sector, internationally trained health professionals have always been and will continue to be a core part of our healthcare workforce. And so we need HHR strategies, regulatory systems, and workplaces that are built on equity, informed by data about IEHPs or NINs, and that engage all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem to arrive at solutions, including IENs themselves.
Thanks so much, Joan, for that great overview and giving us the foundation that we can now think about the actual experience of IENs, and Dr. Edward Cruz is going to walk us through that. Edward?
Yes, thank you very much, Judy. And so for this part of the masterclass, I'll be sharing some of the findings of my team on our study related to the employment trajectory of Philippine educated nurses in Ontario. Next slide, please. The theme adversity and workplace challenges was discussed by our participants in terms of issues working with different cultures and unfair labor practices. Participant 1, for example, female dual registration as RN and practical nurse, had this to say: I was definitely overwhelmed because working with different cultures, it's already a lot to take in. Participant 2, female, in Canada on a temporary work permit and working as a personal support worker, discussed her experience of unfair labor practice in the following terms. Honestly, I'm a little bit frustrated and sad. In what way? Because back home we're nurses there. I have a lot of problems. First, my employer abused me, and then that's why I moved to a city in central Canada. Too much work, overwork. I mean, they don't pay me the right salary. Overtime work, no pay. Holiday, no pay. And sometimes I work Saturdays and Sundays. The next theme relates to microaggression, stereotyping, discrimination, and racism experienced by these nurses. Participant 14, female and working as a nursing resource team RN, shared the following. It's just the patients sometimes. Sometimes they see you before you even speak. They will say, do you know how to speak English? Or because of your color, they don't want. Some of the white people don't want a nurse that is brown. Participant 35, male, working as a registered nurse in a medical unit, said, there was one patient. He told me, can you get a white nurse for me? And participant 24, female, working as RN in primary healthcare, shared this. She, referring to her coworker, assumed immediately that I got my permanent residency through a nanny visa because I'm Filipina. The other theme that emerged from the data is planning for the future. Participant 7, male, working as a registered nurse and a manager in long-term care, shared their vision for the future. I want to see change. I have to be on top of things, so that's the place where I should be if I want to see change. And finally, participant 23, female, working as a registered nurse in OR, said, I wanted to make change. When I left the Philippines, I was the head nurse in OR, so I can see that, of course, I have a lot of things to learn here. So I guess I can do that. I just really wanted to prove them that we can do it. Philippine-educated nurses who volunteered to be interviewed in our study encountered different forms of challenges as they attempted to begin their lives in Canada to become nurses again. At least prior to or until the beginning of the pandemic, many found the registration requirements and processes confusing and onerous. Participants in our study reported unfamiliarity with socio-cultural and workplace norms and practices as among the challenges they faced. Nurses who were on a temporary work permit faced increased employment precarity and exploitation. Almost half of participants interviewed participated in some form of bridging education or transition education. Based on the interviews from these nurses, they reported that bridging courses or programs helped them gain a better understanding of the standards of practice and role expectations for nurses, as well as Canada's healthcare landscape. Experiences of microaggression, stereotyping, discrimination, and racism were raised by many of our participants. It is, however, interesting to note that some participants hesitated to share these experiences. This may be related to the Filipinos' cultural value of pakikisama, roughly translating to getting along with others in English, or the sense of religiosity, ipagpasa Diyos na lang, or leave everything to God. Or it sometimes makes us wonder if they were denied opportunities. Many of our participants indicated no desire to pursue leadership roles or to advance in their careers. This seems to align with the Filipinos' general approach to life, which is that of acceptance. Bahala na, or come what may, captures the strong belief among many Filipinos that whatever may happen is a part of God's will. In contrast, those who have undertaken some form of bridging or transition education aspire to assume leadership and management roles or to advance their nursing careers. Although the experiences that we shared here today are those of Filipino nurses, it is safe to assume that many IENs have experienced the same challenges, issues, hopes, and dreams. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edward. I feel like we had this big umbrella grounding, if you will, that Joan provided us, and I was and still am overwhelmed with the complexity of the process that is required for them to come from another country and to finally be working as the established and valued colleagues that they are. And then you gave us that very personal, intuitive experience of what's happening to them. And so now we're going to move to Dr. Ruth Lee, who can give us a pretty good overview of what kinds of supports are available for these internationally educated nurses. And we'll get back to that with questions, but let's start with Ruth.
So I just like to thank Joan and Edward for laying the foundation for what I have to share right now. I also want to let everyone know that these are very real and the challenges are real, but I also very happy to share that we have many, many success stories. And many IENs, in fact, have very successful career in Canada, and we need to learn from them. And it is what I'm thinking. And then, of course, we have ways to support them as well. So Care Center for Internationally Educated Nurses is actually one of the bridging programs. We are not an academic institution, so we don't give credits, but we also provide many, many professional development workshops and other services, including settlement services, to ensure that the journey is not as harsh that we like to see. So one of the things that you probably noticed, Edward share story about people on work permits and so on. So Care Center, unfortunately, we only able to provide services to Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and also most recently the newcomers from the Ukraine. And refugees. So we have some limitations, and we hope that we're able to help more, particularly those heart-wrenching stories that shared by Edward, who are on work permits and in that journey that we're not able to provide help. So Care Center started in 2001, one of the very first bridging training programs for IENs, or we call international educated professionals, which nurses represent the lion's share of that IEHPs. So we basically guide the IEN every step of the way, even before they come to Canada. So our program, we call it STARS program. You see at the right-hand corner there is for Ontario residents. It's a pan-Ontario program. And the pre-arrivals support and services program is for Canadian, for anyone designated to come to Canada, any province, territory in Canada, we provide that pre-arrival support. And we actually in the discussion with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada to provide a post-arrival service, hopefully by next year. So you can see that is a journey. We basically divide that journey into 3 big circles. So you can see all the IENs will start with assessing credentials and language competency. I think Cynthia is going to give you the example of British Columbia. So we at Care Center, we provide that support, and we also help them meet the requirements. And then we also provide support post registration. So getting the license is a huge deal. But after that, it's more heart-wrenching. You would think that after they get licensed, then they have the key to success. It's far from that. It's very, very challenging. As Joan showed you the statistics and Edward showed you the lived experience. We still have challenges. Believe it or not, we don't have as much challenge getting IEN jobs during the pandemic. right now we're experiencing some challenges that some employees are become, should I use the word picky, including not as tolerant to someone speaking English as a second language. I'm included. The patience is not there. So for them to even get through that interviewing process is a challenge. For probation is another issue when you talk about microaggression and all that. So fortunately, we do have case managers that we assign every single one of our members a case manager, a go-to person to get support and share experiences and find solutions. And then at the high level, I myself and my leadership team will work with employers to ensure that the transition will be smooth and address issues at a broader level rather than targeting individual IENs. So at the bottom there, you can see that we start with a one-on-one case management model. We basically provide mentoring programs. So not just our case manager mentoring, but we also secure nurses who are actually working in the workplace to be mentors and provide training for them and optional job shadowing and so on. So I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit more. So post registration, as I said, very important. So how do we really prepare them when they are even in that journey? I think it's okay, Judy, you can go to that next slide. So you can see that we have 4 major buckets, if I can call it professional development workshops and courses, to basically provide those support in a very timely fashion. So no offense to Edward or Leah, that the academic institution, you do bound by academic calendars, but Care Center is very nimble, right? So when we have a few IEN needing certain workshops, we make it happen to them very, very quickly. So one of the example, maybe I can pick the green bucket here, the Westchester nurse competency assessment through Touchstone. We put it together within a month. So when we know IENs are going for that test, it's like OSCE test that most students are familiar with. We have simulated patients that we work with the Touchstone Institute to make it happen so that the IEN have the drill, because most Canadian grads will have the OSCE. They're quite experienced with that, but for IENs, it's totally very, very foreign. And I'm very proud to say that 90+% of our clients go through that, they're successful. So we can have the next slide now. So I mentioned about the mentoring program. As you know, IENs left the home country. They come here with no foundation that you and I have the privilege of. Our schoolmates, our co-workers, our community, and all the support system. They come here, they left all that behind. They're very lost. So what we have done is that we have the optional job sharing program for over a decade now. But since COVID, we are not able to go to the workplace. So we have a virtual mentoring program. And even post-COVID, this stays and people love it. IEN is so happy to have that communication with a nurse. Actually, most of our members become nurses now at the workplace. They volunteer to be their mentors. So we have a good mix of Canadian grads as well as IENs serve as mentors to help the IEN and moving them along the way. So very importantly, as we heard, after the license is the beginning, but after license, we have a lot of challenges for IENs. And for the longest time, we only look at the IENs. Just shape up the IENs, toughen the seat, and they be fine. It's not fine. We know it's not fine from the literature. It needs a village to support the IENs. And I often refer this whole thing as the beautiful garden. So for lucky Judy being closer to the Butcher Garden in Victoria, or for us in Toronto with Edwards Garden, we need to have the right kind of soil, sunshine and water to allow that tough seed to grow. IENs are tough. They are very resilient, but having said that, if you don't give them the right kind of nutrients, they will not survive. So we're very fortunate to have some seed money between January 1 and March 31st this year to provide support system for the employers and the team that work with IENs, and also IEN working right now in the healthcare system. And we have close to 900, we have close to 1,000 people participated, actually over 1,000 when we sent out a call. So you can see that these are the programs that we provide to the co-workers and leadership teams and all that, to provide them the perspective from the IEN, what they need to know, what they need to do to support the IEN, to allow them to be successful. Because we need the IEN's talent. They bring different perspectives of nursing practice from all over the world. And Canada is increasingly diverse, as we know. And we have particularly older folks. They really like to hear someone speaking Tagalog to them if they're from the Philippines, right? Right away, they warm up. And we know from literature that when people are older, they need people to understand their language and the culture and all that. And IEN can definitely provide that support. So at Care Center, we have over 100 countries represented at our center and over 100 languages as well. So can you imagine the wealth if we put them to good use? So I think I have shared some of the services here. I'd be happy to entertain any questions later on.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It sounds like you're just doing amazing work at CARE, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue once we're done the formal presentation. So thank you so much. Leah, you're on to talk to us about the CASN preceptorship program for IENs.
Sure. Thanks so much, Judy. So my name is Leah Watts from the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing. CASN represents undergraduate and graduate nursing programs across the country. We have about 95 member schools. And I am going to speak to the Internationally Educated Nurse Preceptorship Program that I am coordinating. So it's funded by Health Canada earlier this year, and the funding runs until September 2025. The purpose of the project is to support integration and retention of internationally educated nurses in the workforce. So with this funding, CASN is developing a program where healthcare agencies can sign up and enroll experienced nurses into preceptor training, who will then work alongside the preceptee, or in this case, the IEN, who will also go through a period of training as well. There is no cost to the healthcare agency that wishes to sign on. The only cost would be that they are giving their employees release time to take the training. And the project structure, so we have an advisory committee that Ruth and Edward are also part of. There's about 16 people from across Canada, just with a wealth of knowledge and experience in working with IENs. And we also have a content development working group of 6 content experts who are creating the preceptor training program. So just a program overview. The first part of the program is the preceptor training. It's 3 months long, and it covers 3 modules that review 9 topic areas. It is delivered asynchronously. So the preceptor would sign on to a learning management system, and they would be able to access recording PowerPoints on the different topic areas kind of at their own time, whenever works best for them. And then towards the end of the 3 months, they will engage in 1 live discussion led by our content experts, as well as to allow engagement with the other preceptors. And then they will complete 1 assignment, which is really a consolidation of learning. The second part is the IEN support. So the IEN works with the preceptor during the next 3 months. They engage in 3 live workshops that are delivered virtually. And then during the 3 months, they also take 4 virtual simulations on geriatric fluid volume deficiency, respiratory deterioration, multiple organ dysfunction, and running a code. Go ahead. So some of the topics that are covered in the preceptor training, really just having the preceptor to understand sort of their roles and responsibilities, how to set goals and expectations with the IEN, looking at the relationship, covering, communication, different styles of communication, verbal and nonverbal, role modeling, having the preceptor, really understand and see that they are role modeling what it means to be a nurse in Canada, in that workplace especially, and then just different theories and strategies on teaching and learning, helping to build confidence, fostering clinical reasoning, observation and constructive feedback. We've heard a lot about feedback being challenging for either preceptors or for IENs, because it can vary culturally on how you give and receive feedback. We looked at assessment and evaluation, the IEN experience, what it, could be like for them arriving in Canada and entering into a new workplace, managing conflict in the workplace, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I should add to this list, the topics decolonization, indigenization, and reconciliation are also part of the preceptor training. So there's 2 cohorts. The first one starts in September, and that's the preceptor training. It runs September to December. And then the IEN would start in January and go until April. And the second cohort will start the preceptor training in January, and then with the IEN training starting in April. And hopefully we see lots of success with this program, and Health Canada will allow us to continue on after September 25. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Leah, on getting that funding, and we're looking for great things coming out of it. And certainly sounds like you have a lot of great experts on your panels advising you. So, and it's a pleasure to have them here. So Cynthia, you are the last person to speak on your development of a pathway pilot for IEMs in British Columbia. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be presenting with this cohort of folks. I think Ruth's comment that it takes a village, I'm hoping the audience will see it really truly reflected here when it comes to supporting and advancing internationally educated nurses into our workforce. In British Columbia, the BC College of Nurses and Midwives regulates over 70,000 nurses and midwives in our system. 6% of our registrant base or licensees come from other parts of the world. They've been educated elsewhere, and they are from everywhere. So this picture kind of gives you a sense of the applicants that we are seeing and the individuals that we have licensed over many years in our province. Maybe we move to the next slide. So before 2018, British Columbia's regulatory structure for nursing was divided into 3 separate colleges. In 2018, we were able to bring those 3 together as one. And why that's important is that an internationally educated nurse applying to be a nurse in British Columbia before we merged would have had this experience. They would have applied potentially up to 3 times to see which regulatory agency would license them. It's very convoluted, very challenging, very difficult to navigate. And so in 2018, the colleges actually merged, and we were able to do a significant amount of work to really think about how could we streamline the application process for internationally educated nurses. How could we have them apply once and have a single decision once about their ability to be licensed in the right nursing designation? Because even that can be very difficult for IENs to navigate and understand. British Columbia's nursing profession has a number of different designations, and sometimes those designations are very different than an IEN's experience in their home country. So even just helping them to understand what's the difference between a registered nurse and a practical nurse, and being able to explain that in very simplistic, clear terminology is really important. So we've undertaken over the past few years a significant amount of policy review and change. We looked at opportunities for expanding the way that internationally educated nurses have their credentials reviewed. And you heard from Joan earlier today, and Wes is one of the services that many IENs coming to British Columbia use. We also wanted to look at confirming that they'd attained education is one thing, but we were doing a significant analysis about their learning. And in hindsight, what we thought about was, is that really helping us to know how well they could practice today, especially if they completed their education many, many years ago? And so we've introduced what's called a competency assessment. We had been running one for a while, and you heard Ruth speak to a similar process that CARE supports. But we do have a competency process that internationally educated nurses can go through, and it actually evaluates them across the continuum of nursing profession and competencies. So it gives them feedback about how well they would fit into a registered nursing role or a practical nursing role or even a care assistant role, so that they can make good decisions about which pathway, which application pathway they want to choose. We've also looked at our language proficiency requirements and made changes. And we've really looked at ways to ensure that we can move people through this process a lot faster. So you move to the next slide. So this is what it looks like now. Yes, it is a wind, but it is one process, not three, which is a huge improvement. And it also means that they are integrating into the system with supports throughout the process in a very different way than they would have had prior. Maybe we can move to the next slide. So has our review, our streamlining made a difference? Certainly in terms of timelines, it's made a huge shift. Before we started our pilot, it was taking individuals between 2 and 5 years to be registered in British Columbia. And many regulators across Canada have worked hard to find ways to streamline their application processes. We're now very pleased to see that the efforts we've made have reduced that time frame substantively. And in some cases, we've had internationally educated nurses advise us that they were very pleased to understand that they could be licensed, but they still maybe hadn't even heard back from Immigration Canada about their application process. So we've always been very mindful and thoughtful about the range of processes that internationally educated nurses have to go through when they are choosing to come to Canada. The application for registration process is just one. And the supports that they are required to seek out or can seek out, such as what you've heard from CARE today, from Ruth's presentation, you can, I truly believe that as the regulator, we need to rely on other partners in the system to really help, again, bring that village aspect to ensuring that IENs can be successful. The licensing or registration process is only one aspect. Absolutely, we can do better and make it faster and less convoluted and less challenging, but it cannot be without an understanding of this broader context of what's happening in the employment environment, with the supports that are available in the education environment. As you heard, just even navigating integration into workplaces for IENs, Edward's research really indicates how challenging it can be. Even after they navigate through I'll call it the more bureaucratic processes to get into practice, they still are struggling with integrating into culture, into workplaces that may or may not support them. So I'm pleased that we've made lots of advancements, and there's still lots of work to do.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. And thanks to everyone for giving us a bit of a picture about what we're striving to do, why we need to do it, and how difficult it actually is. Now, I want to move the conversation into more of a how do we move on from here lens. And so if we think that adversity and workplace challenges, starting a new life, for instance, the labor practices, the different cultures in the workplace, understanding your roles, responsibilities, and relationships as a contributor in the workplace, these are all challenges for all nurses who come in, but they're accentuated, I think, for the internationally educated nurse. So I'm wondering if I could start with Joan again. Joan, how do you think we could better prepare to embrace IENs into the Canadian healthcare and workforce culture and workplaces?
Well, one of the areas that we've been engaged with is really engaging with employer associations. In Ontario, working, for instance, with the Ontario Hospital Association, the Ontario Long-Term Care Association, Advantage Ontario, the nonprofit part of the sector, to really think about the IENs who are in their workforce including looking for and identifying the INs who are in their workforce not working as nurses yet, and really thinking about how can they support them to make their way through the licensure process, and how can they be making the workplace a welcoming environment and a supportive environment for those INs. And so I think, employers really, and, interestingly, the OHA, for instance, recently had a conversation with us about, feedback that they'd gotten from nursing supervisors about needing more information and more support on how they can support the integration journey of INs. And so the association's starting to think about, how do we do that? How do we provide resources to employers and to nursing supervisors on the ground? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for employers to share experiences and to really use the INs who are in their workplace and who are established and who can serve as mentors, as preceptors, as supervisors, and leads for others.
Thanks, Joan. We've had a few conversations about the flow, and your presentation at the beginning with all the circles and all of the elements that are involved in bringing IENs not only to the country, but making them successful in the workplace. And is that all working well together, or does it still seem a bit fractured to you? And what would you suggest in that situation?
I'd say it in some areas it's working better than it used to, but it is, the journey of any immigrant moving back into their profession. There's an immigration journey, and that has them interacting with the federal government and with the immigration system and with that whole process with settlement services. Then there's a licensure journey in a regulated profession, and that involves not only the regulator, but it often involves a post-secondary or an educational institution to get recent practice experience. It involves an employer to provide that experience. It involves organizations like CARE to support people through that journey. And then there's the workplace integration, which is a whole other journey. And I think one of the challenges in the past has been that those are very siloed sets of stakeholders and institutions that each have their own mandate. And in the past, there was a lot of that part. I can solve this part, but I can't solve that part. But the journey of the person going through this process is not siloed in that way. It's one experience, it's one life, and they need to interact with all of those players. And so I think it's on us to create the tables, to create the connections between all of those players to make that a more seamless journey.
So are you suggesting that it's really still quite siloed, and what should we be doing to make it more congruent, cohesive, integrated?
Others may have thoughts on this. I think it is still fairly siloed, but there are lots of good examples now. I think of, the Supervised Practice Experience Program in Ontario that I have a bit more knowledge of, that Ruth's organization piloted, that really involved bringing together the provincial government to fund it and facilitate it, the regulator to ensure that it meets the requirements, the organizations like CARE, who are the navigators to bring the pieces together, and the employers, and projects like that. And that's been very powerful. There have been, I believe it's over 3,000 INs now that have made their way through that program. And it has only worked because all of those stakeholders were able to come together to design it together.
So thanks, Joan. Ruth, what do you think we need to do to bring all these stakeholders together then?
So, Joan, thank you for your kind words and also bring the reality to the forefront. Wes, we also have been working with different organizations, and we also beyond that high level organization, we also work with different employers, and actually the employer come to us. So I never forget the time that I need to knock at employers' door to bring our mentoring program to them to see if they can help us. And then the answer is no. My staff either don't have the time, or you have to pay how many $100 for your IN member to come to job shadow our nurse, that kind of thing. So the table turned completely because of the crisis that we have because of COVID. So that's a need out there now. So when Joan cited the number so high of 2022, and many people actually call me up. I say, Ruth, I thought that the whole world's airport come to a halt because of COVID. No one's allowed to travel. How come do we give exceptional permission for the IN to come to us? And I tell these folks, no, this IN's been with us for a long time. Some of them been with us for almost a decade, believe it or not. In that journey of reaching to, you try to reach to the dream, you know, just becoming back to themselves again. Just imagine you as a nurse or whatever profession you are, you just want to go back, your first choice of career, of your dream job, which is a nurse here. So we're very fortunate that in the old days, if a nurse IN left their safe practice, so majority of the provinces, I think Cynthia is 5 years, right, at in BC, but in Ontario is 3 years. So you can imagine 96% of the nurses in Ontario are being female, and INs are close to that number, 90 in the 90th percentile. Their top priority, no offense to Edward, women, they pay attention to the family. So by the time they get to pay attention to their own career, it's almost like 2 years gone. So you can imagine the challenge, the time rush. So many of them left that safe practice of 3 years, evidence of practice, which is one of the A requirements for them to get the license. So they go home. Sometimes our college will tell them they go home and put in 400 hours so that they can refresh that, and then they get their license. So we went to the college at the time when the whole world come to a halt. And thank you, Joan, for mentioning us about the work that we have done there. And then, of course, after we tried this for about 6 months, and 220 nurses actually get the license just from our end, from care center. And then, of course, there's a much, much bigger number that Joan have shared with us that successfully transition into the nursing workforce so that they can help the pandemic at the time. So we're happy that we see those opportunities for IENs out of the crisis. But what I'm seeing now is not pretty. I can tell you now that we are seeing a lot of nurses come to us to become a member. Thank goodness they know about us now. They didn't get hired. Initially, they thought they'll get it. They will, like, they have the license. So it's no reason there's so many jobs out there. But many got turned down, turned away. So when we do that high level reach out to employers about the issues, about people actually failing their SPAP that Joan talked about, that those people left the safe practice now in the supervisor practice experience program. Some of the employers, because they know us, they pick up the phone and say, hey, I just don't want to end this nursing career, you know, just the one more requirement, they be a nurse. How can care center help? So sometimes we enroll them, we coach them, and we actually reach out to the regulator to say, let's pause this if possible, give us some time. And majority of the time, IENs are very savvy in their technical skills, right? But then it's all this communication that we talk about. Communication, not knowing the culture, not knowing when to say what. This yes doctor thing, we have to absolutely tell them to stop doing that, right? You have your own accountability now as a full-blown professional nurse. So all these things that they need to learn, they need to know how to communicate, they need to know when to provide that eye contact, even at change of shift reporting. All those nitty-gritty. So you see my 4 buckets of professional development workshops on my slides. So one of those buckets is the technical skills. They're not familiar with our pumps, for example, the IV pumps, right? Mm-hmm. For those nurses come from the Middle Eastern countries, and I would say majority of them being Filipino and Indian nurses, they will look at our pump laughing because our pump's actually pretty old. And they are very savvy. But for those of them come from not so developed countries, they have a lot to learn in terms of the technology, about documentation, the standard of practice, and the scope of practice. In some countries, they can do so much, Cynthia, will scare you. They will just go ahead and do it. So what I'm saying is that we need to coach them to unlearn some of those things and
Mhm.
hold their hand, have that neutral person in the form of a case manager to bounce off ideas. And then additionally, they all come with family, majority come with family, even if they're by themselves, they need a life, right? So they need to know where I can get my community folks I can talk to, how I can reach out to other colleagues from the same country that we can share and vent and for a chance speak my own language, like those comforting things that we take for granted every day. So
Thank you.
that's what we do at Care Center. We engage settlement agencies, we engage local integration programs and professional organizations. For example, we work very closely with the Integrated Filipino Nurses Association and other organizations for different ethnocultural nursing groups, so that they have that sense of community that I talk about, that they uproot themselves. We need to recreate that network for them so that they can feel supported. And particularly for those nurses who are in rural areas, we actually really advise those employers to make sure if they can have a buddy for them, maybe from the same country or close thereafter, or another IN, so that they can, speak with no fear of people will look down at me or think that I'm not competent and things like that. So anyway, I think I talked too much now, so I'm gonna
Well,
let Julie
great.
take back the
Well,
mic.
that's very informative, Ruth. Obviously, CARE is doing an outstanding job of providing that bridging support. So my next question, maybe I'll ask Leah and Cynthia to weigh in initially, and then anybody can put their hand up, is this idea of bridging. So there's educational and skill bridging, but then as Ruth has pointed out so poignantly, there's also cultural and just life transition needs that these internationally educated nurses have. And based on my research of transition, I can't honestly imagine what it would be to add not only to a transition to practice as a professional, but everything that has to do with your life. And then you're also transitioning your family and your children. So it's not just you. So I wonder, Cynthia or Leah, whoever wants to maybe jump in first, I'd like you to talk a little bit about those important elements of bridging programs. What are they?
I can
Sure.
go. Oh, go ahead, Cynthia.
No, after you, Leah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say at CASN, in terms of developing this preceptorship mentorship training program, one of the most important elements we thought was to train preceptors prior to them kind of working with and alongside the IEN. So just helping to increase their awareness sort of their role as a preceptor, but then also what the IEN is experiencing in terms of starting in a new workplace, as well as starting in a new country. So, and all of the varying elements that have been kind of discussed throughout the last hour here on what that looks like for the IEN, and just having the preceptor to really be aware of that additional piece as they're starting to work alongside the IEN. And Ruth spoke a lot about communication differences across cultures. And I think that's one that has come out several times in speaking with healthcare agencies about the program that we're offering. So yeah, I think that's kind of a key element that we're working on.
Thanks, Leah.
One
Cynthia.
of the interesting things we've been able to understand better through the use of the OSCE, the competency assessment, is that in my world, bridging meant like spending a whole year in an academic institution. Lots of people don't need that. To Ruth's earlier point, IENs come with an incredible amount of skill, especially if they are if they've practiced in the last few years, and even if they haven't, they have if they have a strong foundation, they can do amazing things. So for our organization, in doing that assessment, it's about figuring out what they actually need, versus sort of saying, here's the recipe, just go do this and off you go. So we try to really fine tune it to recognize the unique contribution that every IEN can make to the system, and to really focus in on helping them build a learning plan if they need it at all. But if they do, that it's about the stuff where they are going to fall short. And quite often it is exactly as Ruth has shared: communication, integration into the cultural norms in a workplace, understanding the standards of practice, understanding autonomous practice, which for many internationally educated nurses is a huge shift, to recognize that they're fully liable for that interaction. And what does that even mean in the context of a different sort of legislative and regulatory framework, which is the Canadian framework? So absolutely, our ability to think about bridging as more modularized, more targeted. In some cases, it is about that preceptor, like honestly, a preceptorship is what's needed here. There's access. The CASN's program, which will launch soon, will be very welcome, because I think those are those unique opportunities that meet the unique needs of that unique IEN. I think we've too often kind of tried to put these, one size fits all. And that's not the reality. Every IEN comes with an amazing background, knowledge, skills that can contribute in so many different ways. So how do we set them up for success? How do we make sure that we're not asking them to do stuff that they don't need to do? And really supporting them to do the things that they do need to do to make them successful in practice. So those are just my reflections. We can't hear you, Judy.
I hate when people do that. Sorry about that. Yeah, wonderful, Cynthia. I love the idea of this individuating or individualizing the needs, because you just can't throw the same resources at every internationally educated nurse, assuming that they all need the same thing, because they don't. And I feel the same way about newly graduated nurses transitioning into the workforce, right? Some of them are going to have problems with roles. Some of them are going to have problems with culture. Some of them are good. And we need to really think about who they are individually. And it sounds like we really know what they need. It's a matter of providing that. Edward.
Thank you very much, Judy, and everyone, for sharing your thoughts. I think I wanted to highlight the importance or the value of case management, which is a service, for example, that Care Center is providing to its clients. There are IENs who want that one-on-one mentoring, if we may call it as such. And mentoring IENs I find that it's a little more, it requires a little more than what we would typically do with a Canadian graduate. Sometimes we focus so much on mentoring them with regard to their nursing knowledge and skills, but we also need to take stock of the reality that we are recruiting them from overseas, and then we are trying to put them in a different community setup. And so we should also consider involving the community if we wanted to promote the retention of IENs in those communities. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Oh, what a great idea. I really like that. Edward, have you seen it done? Is there a particular...
I believe there are some areas where they've done it, for example, in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba, especially those IENs who have been assigned to rural areas, where community involvement was critical in retaining them. I understand from the study of Dr. Catherine Baxter in rural Manitoba that they were able to retain IENs from the Philippines in those rural communities because the community was involved in supporting the IEN's transition to Canadian society.
Wonderful. Thank you, Edward. Ruth.
So I just want to add that at Care Center, we have what we call Meet the Employer sessions, the webinar. So we work with employer. Oftentimes employer will come to us to say, we have challenges recruiting for certain areas of the hospital or community health center or home care. So we will work with them and we'll engage the local community, settlement agencies and cultural community health centers and others, including YMCA, for example, to come to that meet the employer session. And it's very interesting when we did one for Kingston. It's really a big city, but they have remote areas. The mayor of that small town actually come to the session to basically let the IEN know that these are the infrastructure that you can expect. That when you come work with this organization, you can have us, to be with you, particularly those people with young children. Like what are the summer camps, for example, right? Everybody will work because they don't have their grandparents there anymore, right? So I talk about the support. That comprehensive support is absolutely very, very important, adding to what Edward is saying. So yeah, that's one thing that we find helpful.
Oh, great points, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm just going to move the direction slightly of the questioning, because my sense is that there is significant microaggression. So the racism, the discrimination, the exclusion or isolation. And I'd like to talk about that for a minute, because I would like to know a little bit more about that experience. And perhaps what we can do individually and collectively. And I don't just mean collectively as a profession, but as you all have pointed out so well, collectively as communities where these IENs are coming in. How can we be more receptive and more embracing? And I wonder, Edward, if I could start with you.
Thank you, Judy. I think it is important if again, from the perspective of retaining IENs and helping them transition to our workforce. We already are embracing cultural safety and cultural humility in our practices. And I think units and organizations that are employing IENs need to make sure, and Ruth can jump in on this, they need to make sure that their staff are also being prepared from a cultural safety perspective, cultural humility perspective in working with IENs. And this is very critical, because it's not only about cultural safety, is not only about embracing indigenous peoples, it also encompasses diversity in culture, in ethnicity, in the socially constructed race that we are aware of. But we need to be more mindful of that, and we need to remind our staff that IENs are not just warm bodies that we are transplanting from the Philippines or India or any other country. These are humans who have feelings, who have emotions, who have aspirations, who have dreams, and we need to make sure that we are welcoming them and recognize that they have a huge potential to contribute to our workforce and its diversity. Thank you.
So since Edward asked me to jump in, and I'm jumping in. So I think we need to remind all care providers, in this case, where usually how the IEN started a career here, being at the front line, is that we're all Canadians. And we cannot just say that, we have our charter, we're open to the world, and we don't live those principles. We promise to the world. That's why we attract so many wonderful talents to this land. And when they come here, they were just shocked, and they live through those stories that Edward has shared with us. That's not fair, right? So we need to, as Canadians, as organizations, as healthcare providers particularly, and I'm embarrassed to be a nurse some days, that how we are not just eating the young, but we're also eating the new, in this case, the IENs. When people are stressed, they let out their steam on the most vulnerable, and it's not going to help matters. So I think some of the things that we need to remind the healthcare team, and that's why our workplace integration program is out there to help employers and their team and their leadership. And this modeling the way, it needs to be all the way from the top down to the one-on-one. So I think that's something that we need to pay attention to. a lot of times people become very impatient in a very fast-paced organization. When they listen to someone like Ruth Lee speaking with an accent, they're not quite understanding. I speak too fast when I get excited, and they start yelling at them. And I've been telling the, folks, please, I can guarantee you 99.9% of the IEN do not have a hearing problem, okay? So you don't have to be shouting at them to bring your points across, and you only make matters worse. And then you need to know some of the basics about cross-cultural communication, that you need to recognize eye contact is by no means universal. I know that probably Leah's training program for preceptors, you include some of those very nitty-gritty, very on the ground level. I think it's very important we pay attention to on the ground level, that how we can prepare those preceptors, who the IEN will be looked up to, because they see them as role models. And please do not force anyone to become a preceptor if they don't want to. And they just let out the steam because they get mad. My manager don't listen to me, just make me become a preceptor. Making anyone to do something they don't want is not going to help matters. It's only make things worse. So I see that Cynthia have her hand up. I better let Cynthia comment.
Yeah, well, that's a universal issue, right? Is the lack of preceptorship, and so that we assign people as preceptors for new nurses or new employees, and they don't really want to be. Cynthia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add that the other sort of piece that the role the regulators can play. For example, BCCNM introduced an Indigenous cultural safety, culture humility, and anti-racism standard 2.5 years ago. And yes, it's really focused on the experience of Indigenous patients and ensuring that nurses and midwives are adequately and appropriately providing care to Indigenous patients. But the principles apply much more broadly than just for Indigenous communities, patients, families. And so, we've been working really hard as a regulator to look both internally at our own operations and figuring out how we can be more anti-racist and culturally safe, but also modeling the behavior for the registrants, modeling the behavior for the employers. Because, it does, again, I go back to Ruth's point, it takes a village. So even thinking about more than just preparing a welcoming space, it's also about this ongoing relationship of respect that nurses show each other and their patients and the families and the communities in which they work. And so one of the roles the regulators can play is really providing a clear expectation and holding people to account for that. So we are starting to see an increase in complaints and reports to the college about racism. It's disheartening to see that. However, in my view, it's a positive, because if we know it, we can deal with it. So, that to me is again, and we didn't do that in a silo. We've been working with employers, we've been working with communities, we've been out talking to First Nations governing bodies to really ensure that the language that we use to describe those expectations, how we are navigating reports of racism when they come forward, that it's done in a culturally safe, humble, reduce the harm, so to speak, right? And be trauma informed as we go, because people have been harmed. And so how do we ensure that no more harm happens and that we stop that from ever happening again? So just another angle that regulators can play, in my view, and on an issue that is important, and it's also insidious. It's everywhere. Unfortunately.
I want to bring Leah back into all of this, because another piece of the general transition experience of newly graduated nurses moving into practice for the first time is the importance that preceptors and mentors understand the transition experience. And so, Leah, I'm wondering if you could comment on the content that is going to be, or already has been determined to be, in your preceptorship program. What is it that are you attending to all of these cultural nuances and holistic needs of the internationally educated nurses for preceptors, so they understand?
I think IENs, like I know you were using the term IEN to describe like enormous group of individuals from various countries that are extremely different. So I think we're being careful to kind of work with developing preceptor skills in terms of like understanding that there are differences, not necessarily that these are the differences for, nurses coming from here, there, and wherever else, but that there are differences, and here's maybe some skills in how you can communicate to identify, maybe build the relationship to be more of an ally as well, and provide that support in that space too. I don't know if
Yeah.
Edward has anything else he wants to add
Yes.
as one of our content developers.
One of
Sure.
the things that we are highlighting in one of the modules is the practice of cultural safety and humility, which Cynthia has kindly highlighted as well. I think it's very important that we practice cultural safety and cultural humility, and also a trauma-informed lens, to make sure that again, we are supporting these IENs in a very positive light. And it also I was just wondering to, if you recall in my presentation where I spoke about IENs or Philippine educated nurses not wanting to assume leadership or management roles in the future, and that may be related to the trauma they have experienced trying to get registered in our healthcare systems. And so these things need to be unpacked with our colleagues at the hospitals or organizations where they are being employed, to make sure that no further trauma is inflicted on them.
Joan, I have a question for you that's along these lines. It has to do with the skill challenges for IENs and how we educate for success. What do you think are the primary skills that we need to be focusing on, and that you are probably focusing on? Is it education of institutions? Is it education of the actual IENs? Can you comment on that?
WES as an organization isn't, I mean, the evaluation work that we do is on the educational content and educational background, as opposed to the on the ground competencies. But I think, where we've been playing more of a role is with employers, with employer associations, with educational institutions, and both trying to bring the voices of IENs directly back to those institutions, and in helping to bring those institutions together. And I think there's a big, as I said before, there's a huge need for breaking down the silos and collective problem solving across those organizations. I mean, we did something, we've been working with the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions to do a series of workshops across the country with IENs, talking about all of the innovations that have happened in the last year or two, and getting feedback from IENs themselves about what's working, what isn't working, and then convening government, regulators, employers, service providers together to hear that feedback in a safe way for the IENs. And I think that, that kind of ensuring that IENs and in other spaces, other internationally educated health professionals, that their voices are part of this conversation directly, that their feedback is being heard, that the preceptors who are supporting them directly are being heard. That's what's going to change the way that we work in these programs, is hearing directly from the folks on the ground, which we are not at WES, but we've had the privilege of being able to help convene and be a bit of a facilitator for some of those conversations.
Yes, I was hoping you bring up that report. I mean, I'm very excited to see it coming out, because I do think that hearing from the individuals, I still remember a story where I was working in Saskatchewan, and one of the managers came up to me and said, "You're going to be so excited, Judy. We've put together a committee to ensure that we provide the newly graduated nurses with what they need." And I said, "That is so great. Who are the new grads on your committee?" And there weren't any. So it's really hard to know what the needs of a particular demographic are unless you involve them at the grassroots level. So thanks for that point, Joan. Ruth.
I also like to thank Joan for doing those wonderful, wonderful foundational work for the rest of us here, particularly for a care center. We're much closer to the ground. So a lot of the things that Joan have laid a foundation, we're actually able to build on the foundation. We also cite the examples when we talk to stakeholders, right? So that you have this big picture, and then how do we interpret it, right, on the ground level. And also many INs are not familiar with the cultural safety and humility and all that, because that's not the experience. Particularly for those come from pretty homogeneous cultures, right? So this is something that quite unique to the Canadian mosaic that we need to help the IN understand, right? So that for them to integrate, to be part of the nursing workforce, the healthcare services system, we need to do that as well. So as I said, it's a village, and I'm really glad that we come together today, and we absolutely need to find ways that we can break those silos. And you can see there's a lot of cross-pollination going on, as Leah mentioned, that both myself and Edward is already on the advisory, and then we're using Wes work. Many of us use the work on an ongoing basis, and very good to hear the transformational change that Cynthia have presented today. So I'm very, very hopeful, Judy, moving forward. Just think about 6 years ago, not too long, IEN is nowhere to be seen in many ways, but it takes a crisis in the form of COVID to bring this whole thing in, and hopefully we make it into opportunities, like the Chinese people say, right? When there's crisis, there's opportunity. So that's how I like to see this, and I really like to hear that we have a whole lot more success story. I like to see more Edwards. That's why I've been telling Edward, every time I see Edward getting another award, he just got another award, so that you folks know, granted by the RNAO. It just gives me so much joy. It almost feel that this is a success story for Ruth Lee, that all the work that we have done, we're seeing the flowers started to bloom and the garden is becoming more beautiful. So we just need to have everybody come together, live the Canadian dream, live up to our charter as Canadians. We can go out to travel the world and say we are proud Canadians. We are truly live up to our charter, that we are mosaic.
Well, that was a wonderful summary of our discussion, Joan. I mean, Ruth, Joan, you've got something to add there.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Ruth's point that, I think many people in this conversation and in this sector have been engaged with issues around internationally educated health professionals for many, many years. I worked for an association of internationally trained doctors in the early 2000s and sat on a Health Canada National Task Force on IMGs, and sat on the beginning, the advisory committee for the beginnings of care for nurses way back then. And I can honestly say, sadly, it's taken a crisis to push us here, but there's been more change in the last 2 years than there has been in the last 20 or 30. And so I think we're on the cusp of some real changes in our system, and the challenges that we've been talking about here are not unique to nurses. They're across the healthcare system, and certainly the challenges of racism and xenophobia are also not unique to the healthcare system. They're across our society. But the healthcare system has begun to embrace this challenge in a way that I haven't seen in the last 30 years. And so it is encouraging to see what is beginning to happen.
I just met with Lee about something else, Dr. Lee Chapman, and that's a major priority for Health Canada. Which is really exciting, because then that some resources are going to be put behind perhaps mitigating some of the challenges we've talked about today. Edward, Lee, and Cynthia, I'd like to give you also a final word.
Thank you very much again, Judy. From as I was reflecting, listening to everyone talk, not too long ago, before the pandemic, I was told that, Edward, no one will fund you to do research on IENs. And sad, right, good or bad, it did take a pandemic to get interest from funding agencies to do research. And I think it's very important that we recognize that IENs have always contributed to Canada's health workforce, even from the time of uh, before the settlers arrived here. They brought IENs with them from the UK, and so we need to recognize the reality that Canada's healthcare system has always been built on the backs of IENs. IENs have contributed greatly to the growth of our healthcare system, and we need to recognize that, and we need to support them as they continue with their journey to transition to our healthcare system. Thank you.
Yeah, poignant words, Edward. Leah.
I just really enjoyed this panel, listening to all the presentations and the wealth of knowledge that's shared here. I think I'm newer to this area than some others in the group, but I have been meeting with about 20 different healthcare agencies from across Canada in the last month or two. And they, some have had IENs in their workplace for a long time, and some are getting ready to welcome several IENs into their workplace. But I think what I've heard is that they're all keen to do the best they can to support IENs in their workplace. So I think that's really exciting. And I think really encouraging just that the pathway is getting smoother and a little bit easier for IENs to enter our workplace that are much, much needed. So hopefully we are kind of moving in the right direction. And I think from this conversation, it sounds like there's some really great things happening.
Thanks, Leah. And Cynthia, you have the final word.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I need to say anything more. All of the presenters have been superb, and the contributions that each individual and agency or organization is making to really figure out a better way of supporting IENs to be successful, to gain licensure, to have the right supports in place. Like, I hope that the audience really sees the commitment from each and every one of the individuals here today, and the agencies that we represent, because I really do believe that, to Edward's point, there wasn't the level of interest a few years ago. And it's nice to see the investments being made and the care and attention coming to fruition in very new, innovative, thoughtful, supportive ways. So yeah, I'm just honored to be with such a wonderful group of people. And thank you, Judy, for organizing us to come together.
Well, I love the hearts, Edward. Those are great. I just want to say the same thing. I just feel so honored to have spent this time with all of you. I had really very little understanding of both the challenges and all the solutions that are out there for those challenges. And I think that you brought us all into a different center. So thank you so much for that. I know that our viewers will be able to access any of you if they have further questions. And I thank you so much for your contributions to the internationally educated nurse integration and stabilization in Canada. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for including us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.